let's talk about Amazing Workplace. Let's talk about what Amazing Workplace is all about. Like, how did this come to be, or why was this created? And I think I've talked about this before. Short version is that I discovered a while back now that in order to build any successful business, I mean, it kind of sounds stupid to even say it out loud. You need to have the best people. Those people have got to be productive, and you've got to keep them. I mean, it's people. Like, really, every successful business comes down to people. Sure, you can have great technology, you can have great processes and procedures, but unless you've got a great team of people that are kind of committed to the purpose of your organization, you're not likely to do as well as you would do if you did have that. So a lot of the stuff that early on I discovered with working with my company was really based on sort of these water is wet realizations, where it's just sort of like, well, that was stupid. Of course, that's the way it is, right? People are your most valuable asset. They really always have been in any group, organization, or team. And if those people are treated well and they understand why they're there each and every day, what's their purpose? What are we doing here, right? As a group, and again, they're treated well. It's more likely that you will do well as a company or organization. It's more likely that you'll be successful in what you're trying to achieve. So a lot of this was sort of born out of, how do I grow my organization? How do I become more successful at what I'm doing as a company? And how do I reduce turnover? Because that was a big issue. It's not an issue for everybody, but it was a big issue at the time. We had high turnover in my organization. So, and this is years ago. This is a previous company. It was before Amazing Workplace existed. But what I learned back then was, again, it's this water is wet idea. It's like, well, duh, of course water is wet, right? Of course, like, the sun is shiny. I mean, it's almost silly to say these things out loud, but what I realized was that if I just made time to genuinely listen to how my people felt. Now we'll get into the things that are measured in the survey stuff. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But if I genuinely listened to how my people were feeling, and then I made the time to make changes based on their feedback, I found a way to make sure they felt heard and that they felt supported in their feedback, things would get better. And they did. And the requests and the feedback that came in they were things that could be done. I mean, there were certainly a list of things that we weren't going to do. I think one of the pieces of feedback was that an employee wanted us to buy an office pony, so we didn't buy a horse. But joking aside, things like, hey, can we reduce the number of meetings every week? We could do that. Could we shift our standard hours of operation? Because I think we started a bit earlier and technically we're open a bit later, and we were able to do that. We were able to make some meaningful changes that really resulted in our people feeling heard and listened to and cared for. And that's a big deal, and that goes a long way. And in the future, I'm sorry, fast forwarding, I should say, from the high turnover that we had as an organization. So going forward into the future, though it was in the past from now, we were able to reduce turnover to zero. And we were almost 200 people, and we had 0% turnover for 4 years in a row. And we had, some of the awards you see on the shelf behind me, I think there are almost 20, actually it's over 20 workplace awards that I've got connected to the companies that I've either been the CEO of or that I've owned. And it's just following this recipe. It's not that I don't look at it as though I'm some brilliant leader or that I've done something that's new. It's just simply listen to your people, make sure that they feel heard, make changes based on that feedback. I mean, there's some other things we add into that, is creating a safe work environment where people can come to work and not get made fun of for the things that matter to them, which is really important. Avoiding harassment, truly. And and so forth. So yeah, Amazing Workplace was really, it was kind of a passion project for me because I had successfully done this before. I had successfully come in with a team of executives and fixed things, where they weren't they weren't great at the time, and we were able to reduce turnover to zero. Recruiting was really easy. We were able to do a lot of great things, and it was focusing on how our people felt. So that was really the birthplace of this idea of Amazing Workplace, was like, how do we, because I worked with some of the folks I worked with previously, how do we bring this solution to organizations everywhere, especially in light of the fact that right now companies are using things that just nobody cares about, nobody understands. I guess that's probably what I should talk about next. So, Amazing Workplace has the registered trademark on employee happiness. We're the only company that measures employee happiness, and we developed a very specific technology that's more conversational in the way that it interacts with your people, whether that's your customers or your employees, to not trick them, but to actually find out how they feel. And we did a lot of research. We did a lot of historical research and deep dives into the science behind surveys and the questions that are asked, and discovered that one of the front runners of understanding how employees feel was Hauser and Associates. This is just prior to World War II. And Hauser, I'll just refer to them as Hauser, kind of smartly just discovered, if you sit down with somebody, explain to them what you're there to talk about, and then have a dialogue with them, you're going to get very meaningful, useful information. Now, pause the movie right there. The challenge with that within a big organization, challenge with that idea within like a Walmart, for example, or a Starbucks, you've got just people everywhere, is the amount of time and money it would take to sit down with every person and have these meaningful conversations is it's too much. It's not that the money is too much, because I'm sure there are organizations that could invest that. I'm sure Apple could make that happen financially, right? They're a very successful organization. Amazon could probably make that happen as well. And there's a handful of companies that could make that happen financially. But the challenge is that when you add in the time of the conversations and the time to then gather those results and to put them into some usable format, you're talking months, if not a half a year, before you're able to even really confront and look at those results. And that creates challenges and problems, because now the feedback I got 6 months ago isn't going to be useful at that, at that future state, right? You may have missed your opportunity to do something that would have meaningfully improved things at work, right? So time was a component. Not surprisingly, the shift or the focus became, how do we do this more quickly? How do we do this more effectively, if you will? And that shift or focus resulted in Rensis Likert creating the Likert scale. It's pronounced Likert. The strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, strongly disagree, and information gathering shifting away from in-person conversations towards a model where we were now going to survey. We're going to find a way to get paper surveys in front of people and find out how they're doing based on that interaction. The research that was done to support the Likert scale, this is good research. It was really designed around how do we turn feedback into numbers? How do we turn people's feedback into scoring, which was really a direction that everybody was headed, whether that was universities or businesses, like numbers. So how do we create a number that could then be used as a benchmark, right? Or a mark of the bench that we can measure against, is sort of the origin of that idea or concept. And it was a good idea. I mean, if I were there and I were in the room in dialogue with Rensis or somebody else, yeah, that's actually a pretty smart idea. Like let's find a way to quantify this or get some numbers, wrapped around um, these feelings, which can feel a bit not to be punny, but these feelings that can feel a bit vague or gray as opposed to black and white, right? So let's get some numbers on the table to measure, go through. So I mean, this idea is not a bad idea in its origin, right? So you fast forward, and this is where things I think went a bit off, because anytime you're going to start something new, hey, this is an idea, let's give it a try. It's important to track the success of it, right? So post World War II is really when surveys took off. It's really when the Likert scale began to get used. And at that time, organizations were measuring something called morale. And there were multiple definitions of what that meant, depending on what survey company you used, which has its own issues, which we'll get into at some point. But morale didn't meaningfully improve. So what happened is organizations began measuring this. The scores went up on the board, you get your results back from the surveys, and there wasn't meaningful improvement overall. So that lasted about 20 years. And there was a growing body of research focusing on burnout, which is sort of job demands resources, whether you have the tools and resources needed to do your job. I'm sure many of you have taken a survey where you've been asked that question as an employee. Do you feel like you have the tools and resources to do your job effectively? That became a very popular question or statement to put in front of somebody to ask them how much they agreed with that. So there's this growing body of research that focused on if individuals didn't have what they needed, didn't have the basics, right? If they didn't have satisfaction, which is a word that was created in the 1500s, which meant to have enough, right? If they weren't satisfied, not the same as happiness, that word was created a couple hundred years prior and meant to feel very glad. But if they were satisfied, that it was less likely that they would burn out, and it was less likely they would quit. The focus was really on retention at this time, right? Just how do we reduce turnover? So there's a bunch of research done surrounding all of this, and things shifted in the 80s to satisfaction, and satisfaction is still measured to this day, and it's been steady around 60% satisfied globally across all organizations. That number really hasn't meaningfully gone up or gone down in 45 years. So satisfaction got measured, but it got a bit stale. And there weren't any new developments in surveys or research tied to doing surveys. That there weren't any meaningful improvements. The Likert scale has been now in use for 70, 80 years. Surveys have gone from paper surveys that look like standardized tests to online surveys that look like standardized tests. Companies like Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey are like in there doing their thing. Gallup has been around forever. And there wasn't really any forward progress financially for these survey companies. So enter William Kahn, or Bill. He writes about this idea of personal engagement, which is brilliant. And if you haven't checked out his original writings on this, it was just brilliant. And what he's talking about, I'm going to give you a high level from my point of view. What he's talking about is creating a safe environment, a safe working environment where an individual can come into that environment and be their best self without fear of retaliation, where the relationship that they have with their direct supervisor or manager is a safe, open communication relationship, and that those individuals are going to do much better at work and in life. Absolutely. So this idea of personal engagement got grabbed and converted and turned into something called employee engagement. So all the survey companies that were measuring satisfaction shifted over to employee engagement as what they now measure. Now, interestingly, and you can find this online, in 2023, I think it was 23, Bill was interviewed and asked, what do you think about employee engagement? And he openly communicates that employee engagement, I'm using his words, is violently and fundamentally different than what he wrote about in 1990, and that his ideas were co-opted by organizations to make money, and it doesn't match what he was talking about. Again, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but using some of his words, but paraphrasing a bit. It's not to put words in Bill's mouth, and he wasn't really being critical so much as he was just being honest that what he was talking about is creating a safe environment where you understand how the person feels and you are able to create space and freedom for them to grow into and be their best selves, for them to be able to expand and reach towards difficult moments without fear of being harmed, and just beautiful concepts, right? Employee engagement doesn't even come close to measuring that. It's actually a copy paste edit exercise from the satisfaction surveys that have been done for the last 45 years. And if you think I'm joking about that, go back and look up some of the old satisfaction surveys and look at the statements that are made on there. And then look at the engagement surveys, and you'll see that the statements that are listed, the task that's put in front of your employees, is word for word the same as what was being asked in 1985 and 1990. So there hasn't really been a meaningful improvement in this area for some time. Now, with all that as background, and it's not to throw what's been done in the trash, but the numbers didn't go up on morale. They switched to satisfaction. Satisfaction has not improved in 45 years. It's been flat at about 60%. So any business owner or investor would be like, well, I'm not investing. You then look at engagement, and engagement has actually gone down since it started for the most part, in 2020 by Gallup and a handful of others. And what's shocking about this is that that's the reported numbers from the companies that measure it. Is they publish their numbers every year, and you can see that the numbers are going down. Some of them are level, some of them have gone down, some have gone up. Why are they different? Because each of those companies uses a different definition of engagement, and they use different questions to measure it. So you have organizations out there that are trying to benchmark engagement against other organizations, and the fact is that depending on who you're using, the questions that your employees are being asked and answering are not the same as the questions that are being asked and answered at a competitor. And I don't know how this happened, but HR departments and HR groups have been somehow convinced that engagement is something that really, really matters. And yet, did you know that 6 out of 10 employees have no idea what employee engagement means? So not only are we confusing our employees by measuring this thing that they don't understand, we are completely violating. We are completely now at the far end from what Hauser was talking about prior to World War II, which is that the most effective way to understand how a person is feeling or doing at a job is to start with explaining what you're there to talk about, to make sure that the person understands what they're there to talk about, so that the information that you receive is actually meaningful and aligns with, topically or contextually aligns with what we're trying to measure or discuss. And the fact that Gartner and other studies that have been done about employee engagement prove out that almost nobody understands what employee engagement means is just like, time out. Like, engagement scores have steadily gone down over the last 20 years. Over 60% of employees have no idea what it means. The creator of engagement has gone on record and said, hey, this is just wrong. And yet people are still chasing this thing down and spending, crazy amounts of money on measuring engagement. So Amazing Workplace was created to solve the engagement problem. It was created to solve really the problem that's been present since Hauser, which is, how do we have a real conversation with our people? How do we find out how they're doing, how they're really feeling? And then how do we then present that information in a format that an organization can easily use to affect positive change? So we decided to measure something that matters more than engagement, matters more than satisfaction, and matters more than morale. And we decided to shift away from what are the things that companies have been measuring that matter to them, and why don't we focus on what matters to our people, which is their happiness. And people know how they feel. They know how happy they feel. And happiness can go up and down. This isn't, the goal here isn't to create some sort of artificial level of happiness that's constantly present, right? The goal here is to find out how people feel. and why they feel that way, so that we can use that information to make improvements within our organization, maybe to our culture, and retain our best people and attract great people. So Amazing Workplace was created with the idea that every workplace can be amazing. Every workplace that's willing to really listen to how their people feel, measure their happiness, understand it, and then take steps to improve it can create an amazing workplace, which any organization can do with the right tools and with the right software to be able to get in front of all of your people digitally and then get that information back. So we created happiness conversations, and they're very different than the standardized tests that you see. There's not a list of a bunch of questions. It introduces a topic that we're going to talk about. The employee or the person, could be a customer, reads, listens to, understands what they're there to talk about. And then we simply ask them, hey, how do you feel about that? And then we dig into why. And it's a kind of a choose your own adventure, in that depending on how the person feels, the responses, the acknowledgments that come back to them, the follow-up questions, of which there's very few to keep it relatively short, all are all guided based on their responses. So it's not just a list of statements with a bunch of bubbles that people fill in. It's truly a conversation. It's a back and forth dialogue where digitally, but it's a back and forth dialogue. And we're not, yes, I mean, we're using an expert system. So I guess it's a structured form of AI, but it's not like an open AI. It's not the system is just going to, respond with a bunch of like whatever. It's a very structured list of it. If this, then this, right? So it's, kind of like fancy Excel, which is really what AI is anyway, but we'll cover that on a different discussion, right? But what the result is actually magical. And it's that for the first time, companies really genuinely understand how other people are feeling and why. And you're able to really, for the first time, crowdsource. And what I mean by that is you're able to mathematically understand the actual percentages that support ideas. So for example, let's say that in the area of growth, which is all about whether an employee feels like they've got future opportunities, job opportunities, opportunities for promotions, or professional and or financial growth with your organization. So this is what we're here to talk about. How do you feel about that? And let's say that they don't feel happy about it. Maybe they're only satisfied, or maybe they're unsatisfied, or maybe they're unhappy. Well, when we dig into it and we are asking, well, how come? Tell us more. Like, what would make you feel happier about this topic? One of the options, and we've mathed or scienced this out in terms of looking at the hundreds of thousands of responses we've gotten over time on this specific question. We found that statistically, one of the top reasons is that employees don't really have a clear understanding of what that promotion process or growth path is. Like they don't know what they need to do to get promoted, right? It's pretty common that this comes back as a response for how or why a person would feel happier about growth, right? If I had a better understanding of what it would take to get promoted. So you can now, for the first time, see by exact number, not scoring, not strongly agree, disagree, neither agree, but like pure math, how many of your people within your organization feel that would make them feel happier about, or agree that would make them feel happier about growth. So there's no weird scoring anymore. It's simply like, hey, here's how people feel about growth overall. Okay, great. What are the things that our people are telling us that would make them feel happier? Well, if I could come to your organization and say, hey, 73% of your people, 73 out of 100, agree that a clearer understanding of what it takes to get promoted would make them feel happier about this topic of growth. Well, crap. Well, geez, we should probably put together those promotion guides, or how to get promoted guides, right? It takes the guesswork out of it. It really takes what has been for years kind of an arbitrary a bit score or number, whether that's a satisfaction percentage or whether it's an engagement score, and it shifts it towards usable information that a company can take, put in place, and actually create a future outcome that's amazing. And that's the goal of Amazing Workplace, is to empower organizations to do what they've always wanted to do. In fact, many are spending hundreds of thousands or millions a year on this goal. How do we make things better for people? It's not that organizations don't care. It's that the tools that they're using are just garbage. If you haven't taken one of these surveys lately, you should just sit down and take one. They're just awful. And then look at the results that come into the platform, and that's equally awful. They're just not usable. It doesn't tell me what to do. If I go to a person, I say, "Hey, do you," using the Likert scale, "do you strongly agree, or disagree that you have the tools and resources needed to do your job?" "Well, I strongly disagree." "Okay. Well, what is it you want?" "I don't have that answer." "Well, maybe we can pour through the comments and see if there's more information there." Fingers crossed, right? We've designed a conversation that not just that goes beyond measuring how people are feeling, which is very valuable, but it actually has detailed things that we as an organization can do to improve how people feel about a particular topic. That's the difference, is that instead of just checking a box that I've surveyed all my people and I've got a score on a wall I can compare to somebody else, and instead of actually paying attention to the fact that for 20 years, the numbers or statistics that are reported by these companies have not gone up and in fact have gone down, I'm actually going to do something about it instead of ignoring it. I'm actually going to come in and measure how my people feel, because I care about their happiness. And we're not alone in talking about this. There's a lot of literature that's been out there, especially in the last 15 to 20 years, that has openly communicated, from Harvard Business Review all the way down, that engagement just isn't working, and that happiness matters more than engagement to people and to organizations. So anyway, we'll chat more about it, but that's, in a nutshell, maybe not a nutshell, but that's a little bit more about Amazing Workplace and why we focus on happiness and not engagement.